Welcome to another episode of the Daring to Transcend podcast. I'm Karen Ann Bulluck, and I'm thrilled to have Meri Williams with me today. You guys are going to be totally blown away by her story, so stay tuned. Welcome back. I really want to introduce to you Meri Williams, who is the CTO at Pleo. Meri is an experienced CTO and leader of technology organizations. She particularly enjoys helping others level up as technical leaders and managers of organizations and works as a CTO coach, tech advisor, NED to various companies in this capacity. So I'm going to stop there because I don't want to tell Meri's story when she's right here to tell her story herself. So why don't you just at least tell us a little bit about how you got into technology, your CTO role, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So I grew up around tech. My dad's an engineer, my mom's an accountant, so math and science was never scary to me. And I grew up a bit of a hardware hacker. So I built one of the weirdest things I've done is I built part of South Africa's first satellite when I was a teenager. So something I soldered went into space, which is really weird, and means I have great advice for parents, which is don't let your kids do anything cool when they're young, because I soldered something that went into space when I was 16, and it's all just been downhill since then. Right? Really gawky 16-year-old self. But I was a bit of a polymath at school. I won the English prize and the maths prize and the computer science prize and the Latin prize all in the same year. And so I was kind of unusual in that I didn't have only one subject or one area or whatever that I was interested in. And so when I went to university, it was a choice between classics, so Greek and Latin, or film school, or computer science. And I did my accountant mother influence was very distinct, and so I went, two of these I will never make any money ever, and it's and one of them I will probably make enough money to pay for the education, so I'll do that one. So I studied computer science at the University of Bath, which was great. And then I actually really early on in my studies got an internship at Procter Gamble, and so I spent the first 10 years of my career at P&G in a bunch of different roles. I was an analyst and a programmer, and then a architect, and then project and product and program manager for a while, because they outsourced all the really technical work. And then they realized they'd outsourced a bit too much, brought some back. And so I led a team that ran all the finance systems for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So I used to run the biggest SAP install in the world, but I'm okay now, is how I talk about it. And then I after 10 years at P&G, realized that I was not really close enough to cutting edge tech for who I was and what I wanted. I wanted to get back closer to the technology. So I left P&G and I was going to go to either Google or Amazon. And then a guy called Tom Loosemore rang me up and was like, hey, we're going to fix the UK government. Come help us do that instead. And so I joined something called the Government Digital Service and built the team that built Gov.uk, which is actually like really renowned across the world now as being this, amazingly understandable, accessible platform for citizens of the UK, and has been the model of the Government Digital Service has been copied by, so like there's the US Digital Service is the US equivalent. There's in New Zealand, they actually took the code that we had for the UK government websites, and they've reused them because we open sourced it and that kind of stuff. So it's had this worldwide impact. Pretty cool.
That is really cool. I mean, what a trajectory. And I love that you recognized early on that you had you had the skills and strengths in different areas. I mean, I was the same way in school. I didn't have a particular subject that I was really good at. I liked English and literature more than I liked math, because for some reason I had this belief, I don't know why, that I wasn't good at math, and which was completely not true. So I don't even know where it came from. But, I always laugh because I ended up being an English major, despite the fact that my parents wanted me to be a business major. And My boss, when I was working, always used to say, gosh, you would have made such a great engineer. You just have that engineer mindset. And I'm like, but I was an English major. So I guess that's how I could get into technology as an English major, because I spent a lot of my career in tech too. So I relate. But that I love that you left, sort of the established world to go off and do something so impactful and creative. That had to be just an amazingly, felt really good.
Yeah, it was a great journey to be a part of. I'm not well cut out to be a civil servant though, so I'm much better where there is profits and clear. It's not what a politician wants or what what's going to be popular with the public. It's what is going to make money is much cleaner for me. So I went back into business after that. And yeah, very shortly thereafter went into CTO roles. So I was CTO of a tiny healthcare startup that went a bit wrong, and we all collectively resigned over ethical concerns, which is a discussion for another day. It was very entertaining though. And then that team stuck together and formed a little product studio. And our first big customer was Marks and Spencer, which is a kind of fancy retailer here in the UK. And then I ended up as M&S.com's CTO, that was my first CTO role. And then I went to Moon, and then which is like fancy business cards, then to Monzo, which is the leading digital bank in the UK. And then I went to Healx and did AI-driven drug discovery, so completely different again, before going to Clio, which is fintech again. So I'm back in the finance and technology world, back running kind of business critical systems again. And so lots and lots of different industries, lots of different types of role. As I said, I've been engineering for a lot of my career, but I was also product and program and project management at one point. So done a little bit of everything.
So how do all of those varied experiences with the retail and, with the Procter Gamble and, working for a pharma, how do all those come together to help what you're doing now? I mean, we all bring our experiences, and so you're not just a pure technologist. You clearly have the business angle of things, and having those different roles changes your perspective on things, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I definitely bring a broader perspective. I think I'm as much a sort of general executive as I am a tech executive at this point as well. And I think that's what people expect of you at a certain point in your career, right? That they don't want you to be the geek in the corner who just cares about the tech. They want you to be a full part of the team. And I think that's valuable. In terms of how it all adds up, I feel a little bit like Slumdog Millionaire some days. I don't know if you see that movie where like he knows the answer to every question, but through a weird circumstance in his life. And that's a bit what my career is like. So I'll be in the middle of conversations with one of the regulators, whether it's in Denmark or in the UK. And because I used to be at a bank and because I used to run finance systems for a huge company, I know all about Sarbanes-Oxley and I know all about compliance and internal audit and all of these kinds of things. And then that's really reassuring to regulators because that's which that they can speak in. It's something that they understand. Whereas if you come in and you're just talking like modern agile engineering, then they're a little bit like, but where's your change approval board? And you're like, well, we don't have one of those. And that's a little jarring. And then you have to explain how you have the equivalent safety of a change approval board, but just done in a very different way in modern engineering, right? Those kind of things. So I think there's a little bit of that. Having been in a number of different regulated industries, whether it's pharma or banking, has really helped for my role now at Pleo. I think having been at a couple of companies that were really well known for being immensely customer obsessed and really brilliant at the customer experience has really helped a lot as well. Pleo is partly so popular because it's a really easy and nice experience. It makes expenses not terrible, which that's where the aspiration is for expenses, right? Nobody likes expenses, but if they can be not terrible, that's already a brilliant improvement on how they normally. Pleo's like spend management, so we make it easier for people to spend money on behalf of their business, whether that's traveling or buying laptops or whatever else is needed. And so I think the mix of having been in these immensely consumer focused companies and getting that real voice of customer and consumer and that side of things, combined with some of the experience where I got to work on really heavily regulated products and that kind of stuff. And then weirdly, the government gig was also really useful because it's, you know, a website for 60 million people. It's not quite Facebook scale, but it's pretty large, and that's helpful when you're trying to scale up businesses as well. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, and I love the customer focus. I mean, that's so important, and so often in technology, it's easy to lose sight of that because you get caught up in the new tech, you know, the new shiny new object on the tech horizon, and can kind of go down a rabbit hole that will lead you maybe to something really cool from a technical standpoint, but maybe not something that the customer even wants or needs, right? So
a lot of solutions searching for problems in the tech world, right?
Yes, 100%. Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. I love that. So along the way, and I've read a little bit of your background, but so I'm going to lead this, but doing what you've done, bouncing around, having those high pressure, because obviously a lot of those are very high pressure jobs, particularly the ones that are regulated and some of that. I mean, I worked in a regulated industry too, so I get how crazy that can be sometimes. What has that cost you in terms of other things you may have wanted to do, or you know, what have you maybe given up along the way in order to achieve this success that you have?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting because I do lots of different things. I have ADHD and I'm autistic, and it kind of shows in my career. So for the last sort of 7 years, I've been an advisor to a VC. I have been involved. I help run a conference called the Lead Developer, which is a technology leadership conference. I run a charity. I've been on a couple of boards. So I actually just do a lot of things, and I balance them very carefully, I suppose. But there are obviously compromises and things that you have to make choices about. The biggest for me has actually been health related. So back in 2012, got a disability diagnosis. I've got something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is all my joints dislocate. All my collagen is malformed, essentially. So wake up every day with dislocated joints and have to fix that before I can do anything, which is not a great start to the morning. I'll admit.
No,
not ideal.
I can see where that could get your day off to a rough start.
And so that's actually been the thing that's been the most restrictive. Is I used to work like crazy. When I was at P&G, I would routinely work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday normally, and then Thursday I would go in Thursday morning and I'd work through the night and then work all of Friday as well. And that was just like something I quite regularly did to keep up with everything that was going on. And it was not healthy, and it was not sensible, and all of those things. And so I think, I got this diagnosis back in 2012, and I really railed against it for the first few years. I was just angry about it and didn't want to accept some of those limitations, and didn't want to accept that it was gonna be restrictive on some things. And then I hit a wall, and then I had to fix it. So I think I probably gave up a lot of sleep over the years that I shouldn't have done. and that's one of the things that it took for me, is a lot of sleep. But I suppose I'm really lucky. My wife's an architect. She builds hospitals, which is also a very intense world and very intense job. And so we've both always worked a lot, but it's never been a problem between us because we're both working a lot. As long as somebody got home to feed the dog in time, it was all right. And we've traded off quite effectively between us. I think it's lonely though, but particularly being I'm non-binary and often perceived as a woman, and then like there's just not that many of us who aren't men who are CTOs, and so that can be a bit lonely as well. I'm lucky; I've got quite a great network of close friends who are all women in tech, which helps.
Yeah, it is, and that's an interesting comment because it's a thread that I've heard, in talking to women and doing these podcast interviews. The need for community is so important, and it's such an essential part of who we are as humans. But yet, as leaders, we often get in this weird place where in some organizations, you're always in competition with your peers, right? You can't really be friends with your subordinates. I mean, it gets a little challenged. That can get very challenging. And so you kind of can get stuck in this no man's land in an organization where you feel very isolated and very unsupportive. And if you're lucky enough, and a lot of women are, I think, in talking to other women, generally we tend to seek out people and support outside the organization so we can have that community and have that. But it's a loss within the community within the company, the organization, when you can't have that kind of community there also.
One of the main reasons I joined Pleo, actually, when I was I had long COVID and then recovered and was looking to go back to work, and the main reason that swung it in their favor when I chose to join them was the exec team spend almost a week together every month in person. And the CEO fully feels that it is part of his job to make us a team. And I've definitely worked for CEOs in the past who did not know that making the executive team was part of their job, or didn't want to do it, even if they did know it was part of their job.
Or there's the CEOs that still believe in the contentious management thing and actually pit their execs against one another. And I've certainly seen that in organizations as well.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And so just the fact that they spend so much time together. They've actually got 2 executive coaches who are qualified psychotherapists who then work with us individually and as a team. And that just seemed so immensely healthy to me, that they had this first team approach, that my peers are truly my peers. They're not competition. We're not pitted against each other in any way. We're supportive of each other and collaborative with each other. It was a big part of the attraction of the role for me.
That's really awesome to hear. I mean, that's exciting. I can totally see why you would be thrilled by that, because that's pretty rare. I don't think you don't hear that very often, where people really create a team from the executives. And I love that. So I can absolutely see why you would want to do that. So in terms of your health and what you're doing, I clearly you've had to make some changes, put some more things in balance because of your health. I've read a couple things that you said in other interviews that you talked about, accepting your limitations. And you mentioned that earlier here. I think that's hard for all of us. We all like to think that we have no limitations, that we can do anything we want, right? Isn't that the myth? You can do anything you want. But
all at once. Anything you want and all at once, right?
And all at once. But there's that whole thing too. But the reality is we can't. I mean, even if you're blessed with the best of health and you have no apparent physical limitations, most people have a limitation in some way, shape, or form that is actually good, because it actually helps us channel what we really are good at and focus on growing what our strengths are. Have you had that experience with your illness and what you've gone through?
Yeah, absolutely. I had you were talking about it being a little uncomfortable sometimes to be friends with your subordinates, but I had a fantastic VPN when I was at Moo who took me aside and just said, "Hey boss, when you're hurting, you look like you're angry, and it's freaking people out. And it's probably better if on a day where you feel this bad, you stay home rather than dragging yourself into work because you think we need you. Like we're better off when you come in when you're 100% and you stay out when you're not." And it took a lot of courage to tell me that. And but it took a lot of courage to tell me that. But I appreciated it so much, because I just, you don't always know what your face is doing, especially if you're in a lot of pain, right? And I was looking angry, and I wasn't angry at anybody. I was just hurting. But it was just really difficult for people to know that, or to see that, because it's not like an injury that you then get better and then you're fine. If it's something that recurs all the time, it can. And I don't mean that, that it's, I'm actually really lucky. I probably don't have more sick days than the average person in the course of the year. But it made this really big difference to me that she said that, and that I took it on board. But it took a long time to accept it. I really don't think I accepted it for a couple of years, probably. And it has been really, the worst thing is when you can't do something that you used to be able to do. Mm-hmm. The worst is when you're like, oh, I could have done this before. And yeah, I would have hurt the next day, or maybe I would have paid for it for a week, but I could have done it. And now it's just not an option at all to do it. Right. That's been a really fascinating thing, actually, with getting the autism. So a very late diagnosis. I only got diagnosed with the autism and the ADHD in 2019. And it's one of the side effects of being treated for ADHD is now I can choose where my attention goes. I don't have to wait until I'm tired at the end of the day to be able to focus on anything. So I used to work really late because I had to wait for my brain to be tired enough that I could do one thing at a time. And so any writing of documents or presentations or anything where I needed like time to focus on something, that would be 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, because I had to wait for my brain to be exhausted before I could just do one thing, which was really tough. And now I didn't sleep properly, or like people with autism have like half the melatonin of holistic people. And so there's all sorts of sleep challenges and all that kind of stuff as well. And now I've got like melatonin and ADHD meds, and I'm like a normal person. I wake up in the morning and I can focus on what I choose to focus on. And then I am tired by the end of the day, and I finish work and I'm done, which is also a very, very strange. Like, I think if you talk to anybody who'd worked with me earlier in my career when I was pulling the all-nighters just to get stuff done, then they'd be like, this is a very different person than what she was 20 years ago.
That has to be really freeing, though. I mean, in understanding that and, addressing it, and then, being able to say, wow, this, changed my world in eventually in a good way. We do tend to rail against things that change, though, whether it's, changing jobs, changing, especially things that happen to us, right? Whether we lose a job, whether we have health issues, whether, something happens to our spouse, those kinds of things we so often just fight against versus accepting them and seeing how we can work with them and use them to our advantage. And, I love clearly what you have done in you, despite the years of railing against it, which I totally get. I mean, that's totally normal. But eventually you've come to a place where not only are you at peace with it, but you are using it to your advantage. And that has to be an inspiration for people around you as you, share that story with them, I would assume.
Yeah, it's interesting that people's reactions are fascinating, because some people react like they can't complain about anything themselves. That's quite a common reaction, where they're like, "Oh, I shouldn't complain to you. You're dealing," and I'm like, my suffering does not invalidate yours. It doesn't make yours any less important or any less difficult, right? So, I find it really funny when people have that reaction. But yeah, in general, people are very surprised, because I suppose it's. There's not that many people who are as disabled and as senior. So I think they're often very shocked by it. But then, I hope it's a useful example for people that we don't have to all be the same to get where we're going.
And to be leaders and take that leadership role. And, I think it also goes back to the myth that leaders are, infallible. perfect. We have to be superhuman as leaders. We can't make mistakes. Particularly as women leaders. And then, if you get, as you said, some of the other diversity that, you're bringing to the table, I think it amplifies it, right? But there's this expectation that we have to be perfect. We can't make mistakes. We have to be able to do everything ourselves, that we're somehow, particularly when we get to upper levels in organizations, people that, have to be on all the time. I think that's one of the things that I found exhausting about being a leader in corporate, was having to be on all the time, until I figured out that, I really didn't. But there still is an expectation. And when you're not, people, I love that your friend pulled you aside and explained that to you, because we don't always realize in our effort, in our pushing to be perfect, to do everything, sometimes that comes out in ways that we don't, it shows up in ways we don't even know it's doing it.
Yeah, totally.
And I love that you had you had someone who cared enough about you to actually, tell you that. I had that happen to me one time, where somebody told me, you scare people. I'm like, what do you mean I scare people? I don't mean to scare people. I just get, I was somebody who could get really focused on things, and, just, okay, this needs to get done and we need to focus on it and whatever. And I guess that came across as scary at times.
Intensity scares people sometimes, right?
Yeah. And I can be very, very intense. So it was kind of good for her to tell me that, though, because it's like, okay, now I have to really think about how I'm approaching things a little bit more carefully. Say, wait a minute,
Yeah, I think it's one of the most useful types of feedback, right? Is feedback where it exposes to you that your intent and your impact are not matching up. That how you're intending to be experienced and how people are actually experiencing you isn't the same. I think that's some of the most valuable feedback you can get.
Absolutely, 100%. It really is. Sometimes it's the hardest to take, but sometimes it's the hardest to take, but it's really the most valuable, because we can't always see ourselves. There's not a mirror that we can always see ourselves, and we never know the impact we're having. Sometimes we don't know the impact we're having on other people. It's not always obvious. So I love that. So where you are now, I mean, clearly you're happy at Pleo. You're doing a great job. You've got all these other things going on. I mean, the charity, the conference sounds really wonderful to me. I love that, because I worked with so many tech people that were great tech people that didn't necessarily transition well into management. And some of that was okay. Like some people don't want to, or really aren't wired to be in management, and we need to provide abilities for them to move up and grow without it being management. But I also love that you have a conference that focused on bringing tech people into management, because it's not necessarily an intuitive skill.
Yeah, absolutely. And was what people told us was, so Ruth Yarnett, who's the CEO of Lead Dev, she did proper user research when she was putting the conference together, and it was really fascinating. So she had some mock-ups of possible conference lineups, and some of them were all soft skills, and some of them were like a mix of soft skills and tech, and some of them were a mix of team tech and tools. And it was fascinating, because whenever they were shown a full soft skills lineup, people were like, oh, this looks amazing. But they all failed at the final question, which was, would you buy a ticket or ask your manager to send you? Because nobody wants to admit that they need help on soft skills. And so this conference, we've ended up with 3 themes with team tech and tools. And part of the reason that it's those 3 themes is because people need to see that there's technology content and there's process content as well, in order to feel like they are warranted to ask to be sent, which is fascinating, isn't it? That people are so embarrassed about needing soft skills that they need the cover of there being a database, trends in databases talk, and what's AI going to do for you this year kind of talk, to excuse them getting to do the leadership and management and that side of things. It's sort of sad and hilarious at the same time.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, it is funny. It is funny, but at the same time, like, I can totally relate to it. Like, I'm just thinking about myself when I was in tech and, lower down. If I had said I just wanted to go to a leadership conference, yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, but that's really fascinating, and it's sad because growth is growth, right? We need to grow in different ways, and one of the things that's when I have a weekly newsletter that I put out, and I spend a lot of time in that newsletter talking about personal development not because I think I talk to women leaders. I want to talk about leadership skills, but for me, underneath it all, your personal development, who you are as a person, and really bringing out your best is what's going to help bring out the best in others better than telling them what to do. And I read something recently that said, if your senior leadership is unhappy, then the whole organization is going to be unhappy. And how many senior leaders are just unhappy?
A lot. Stressed out, unhappy, and unsure what to do about it. It's very common.
Yeah, it's very common. So, that's why I talk about the development. So it really is sad that people feel like the soft skills aren't by themselves aren't justifiable. But I also love that you've created an environment where they can get what they need.
One of the things we're really proud of as well is we've always had a fully representative lineup at Lead Dev. So that means that there's as many women and non-binary folks on stage as men, that we try to reflect the country that we're running it in terms of like people of color representation and that kind of thing, and LGBT and whatnot. And that's super unusual in the tech conference world as well. There's a lot of tech conferences where there's, a token woman, if you're lucky, maybe a token person of color as well. And then people come to our conference and they're just like, whoa, like, what? How many? What is happening right now? And
that's really cool. Well, tech tends to be still male dominated, particularly tech leadership still tends to be male dominated. And then you talk about, all the other variations. I mean, it is unusual to see that, because even in the most diverse workplaces, there's still a lot, a lot of singularity in that. And I think that's changing, right? I mean, obviously it's changing, but it is, despite the fact that how advanced technology is from a technology standpoint, it's not necessarily as advanced in that standpoint. And I know part of it is because a lot of women haven't gone into, the STEM skills. I mean, I'm a classic example of that. I avoided that, even though I did take some programming classes in college and I ended up being really great at tech, but I didn't go down that road because, I don't know, the only girl in my class that went to engineering school was kind of the geeky girl. It was very nice, but kind of the geeky girl, and it wasn't cool for girls to do that. And I think there's less of that, but still, there's still some.
There's totally a stigma. And it apparently it relates back to somebody in HR at IBM at some point just went, well, hang on, who would want to spend all day just working on a computer? That must be the kind of guys who like sit in their basement and play with radios, right? And they literally rewrote the spec of what a programmer should look like to basically almost write loner male as because actually, if you go back far enough, computer used to be a job title, right? Computer was the person who did computation, and they were almost all women. And in some cases, like with the space program, there's the amazing Hidden Figures movie and book that Katherine Johnson, who was one of the people who was doing the computation by hand to make sure that rocket was going to go to the right place and not explode, right? And so we actually had in the start of the industry a huge number more women. That ironically, there were more women in the 50s and 60s in computing than there are now, as a proportion, as a percentage. And that's all because somebody in some HR department went, "Oh, that sounds like a loner boy job. I'll specifically start looking for loner boys for those programming roles," and it permeated the whole industry.
I had no idea. I had no idea. I learned something.
We had to talk about it at one of our conferences, so that's why I know.
Well, there you go. That is really interesting. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Sadly, and it's so weird how some of the stereotypes and some of the cultural myths that we continue to pass on start from something as bizarre as that.
Yeah.
But it's strange but true, right?
Yeah. Strange but true.
So anyway, to get back to what I was going to ask you.
Yes.
Leo, you're happy, you're settled there, you're doing lots of things, your conference, your things. What does the future though look like for Meri Williams?
So we're on we're still growing really healthily at Pleo, and we're on a road where now we're starting to get ready for IPO. So I've worked at big public companies, I've worked at private companies, I've worked at VC backed and other. I've never done the actual transition to being public, and so that's something that I'm excited to get to do. And it again, my sort of more corporate background super helpful there, because a lot of the ways the expectations are written and what questions they're going to ask security wise and all that kind of stuff tends to be written in this very corporate IT way.
Yeah.
And then that needs translating into what it means for a more modern engineering organization. So looking forward to that, and then just continuing to build a great product and serve. We focus on smaller companies, so we're under 500 person companies is where we tend to focus. So it's actually really nice to see and meet our customers as well. People tend to be pretty excited when they tend to be very enthusiastic about the product, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's always nice to hear. So what about your personal goals?
Yeah.
Or for yourself in the future?
Yeah, so I think my the probably divides in a couple of different ways. So I actually have a model I use for the different vectors at which my personal development can grow. So there's like hands-on technology, strategy, getting shit done, like delivery, organizational leadership, domain-specific stuff, and then commercial. And I think at the moment, my the primary ways I'm growing is I'm getting a lot more back into data and AI. So I'm from an AI background originally academically, and recent developments means it's a big part of my role again now. And so from a tech point of view, I'm getting learning a lot again and getting up to date with AI again. From a delivery and an organizational leadership point of view, just leading bigger and bigger teams. So I've had teams of about 300 before, and that's kind of where I topped out. And then growing teams beyond that point is the next thing for me in that sort of realm of personal development. And then, yeah, on the sort of commercial and domain specific side, it's a lot more about, what will it mean to take a company public? How will I need to change how I manage the team, how I lead the organization, how we communicate internally and externally? What's that going to look like? And so that's the sort of 360 view of my personal development plans at the moment. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. I had to laugh because you clearly had that very engineering way of looking at things, which I just...
and now I have explained it. Now I will follow it. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I love that. So just one final question before we wrap up. You talked about career-wise, where you're going and what you want to grow. What about for your personal fulfillment?
It's a good one. I'm trying to get better at relaxing, which sounds so silly. But I don't get much restoration from just doing nothing. And And I've tried like meditating and those kind of, and because I'm in so much physical pain all the time, meditating is actually really difficult because a lot of it's about being aware of your body, which when you're like, oh, my shoulder's slightly dislocated, that's probably not good. That's not the greatest intro to a meditation session, right? And so I'm trying to get better at relaxing, and so I'm doing a lot of in my spare time, a lot of snorkeling and building Lego and things like that. So just things that are sort of meditative, without distracting enough. And then my wife and I are looking to adopt, so that's the other major life change, which I think will involve a lot of self-development. We'll be getting to be parents for the first time, so that's
that could change a lot of things.
Yes, very, very, very different world to go into, and not knowing what age they might be and that kind of stuff is also just challenging, right? So you don't know quite who's going to end up needing.
But exciting, very exciting. So, well, congratulations on that. That's really awesome. I love that because meditation. I'm somebody who, when I work with clients, meditation, and I'm going to use that in the very broadest sense of the word, it is really important, the mind focus. So I love that you have found ways to, it's really more about just learning how to focus your mind and calm it down. So, doing Legos, honestly, that's a great way of doing it. My husband does it when he's working out, right? Because he just gets really focused on that and stops the mind spinning, right? It's really about stopping that mind churn. So I love that you found ways that work for you for that. And I think meditation gets such a bad rap because everybody thinks you have to sit still and, there's one way of doing it, and there's not. And, I love that you've been able to incorporate those practices, and I'm sure you will continue to need to, especially as you embark on the parenthood route.
I'm continuing to try to popularize the Lego meditation hashtag on Instagram.
Well, if I see you there, I will absolutely support your Lego meditation hashtag. I love that. That's awesome. So, Meri, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been awesome. And if people want to learn more about you or connect with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
I'm on Twitter as geek_manager, and on Threads is the same. And then I'm on LinkedIn, just LinkedIn/Meri Williams. So any of those places are good to find me.
Absolutely. I love that. And I'm Karen Ann Bulluck. I am so happy that you joined us for this conversation today. Please stay tuned for an episode every week. And if you would like to learn more about me, my coaching, my books, my newsletter, you can check out my website at daringtotranscend.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.